Good evening. Welcome to Buck Run, and welcome to our Wednesday night study in the book of Genesis. I know it's the study in the book of Genesis, but we're going to start in Hebrews chapter 11. Genesis is the book of beginnings. It lays the foundation of so much, but I want you to take a look at Genesis chapter 11, because remember, the writer to the Hebrews is, Hebrews chapter 11. The writer to the Hebrews is looking back over all of the scope of Old Testament history, and he's showing how it ultimately points to Christ. He's urging the Hebrews not to turn back, to keep moving forward, remain in their faith of Jesus Christ, don't go back to the law. And so as he's going through the Old Testament, Hebrews chapter 11, he's looking at these characters in the Old Testament and showing how God commended their faith. They are not even close to flawless characters. They are very flawed characters, but he keeps pointing to their faith, and it's their faith that God commends as righteousness. And when you get down to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 20, by faith Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. Remember, we've already studied that part of the book of Genesis where Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. What did he do? He gave the blessing to Jacob. Esau he had a blessing for, but not the blessing of primogeniture, not the blessing of the firstborn, even though Esau was the firstborn. Remember, Jacob gets that because God said the older will serve the younger. And what's Isaac doing? He's invoking his faith for the future. He's confident in the way God is going to use especially Jacob, and he gives him that blessing. In the same way, if you look at verse 21, here's what we're going to study tonight. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. So notice Jacob, as he dies, he's blessing all of his sons, but he's also blessing the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. And the writer of the Hebrews is seeing in this an act of worship, that as he blesses them, he's bowing over the head of his staff. But what's he doing? He's looking to the future, how God is going to use Ephraim and Manasseh in the future. And we're going to see here in a moment that there's a pattern there also of reversal that you see throughout Genesis, where the younger one gets the blessing instead of the older one. And that happens on the deathbed of Jacob as well. Now look at verse 22. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. So the writer to the Hebrews sees that as Joseph dies, he's still looking forward. He's expecting something to happen in the future. He knows that God's plan does not end at his life or at his death. There's not a sense of resignation in him. Well, this is it. This is all there is. No, he knows that God is still working a plan. And of course, we know that that plan is realized in Jesus Christ. So these verses frame for us, from the New Testament perspective, what we're going to look at tonight in the Old Testament. So now turn, if you would, to the book of Genesis, and we're going to pick up in chapter 48 and verse 1. Remember, so chapter 47 ends with Jacob making Joseph promise that when he dies, he'll take his bones or his body back to the land of Canaan, and he'll be buried there in the land of Canaan. And so Joseph makes him this promise. Now we get to chapter 48, and we're at the very end of Jacob's life. There's a note of both irony and humor in this, because Jacob's been talking about his death really for a long, long time, for a lot of years. He's like, oh, this is going to bring me down. This is going to be the death of me. I'm not going to live through this. His sons have been saying, oh, this will kill our father. Now here he is, 130 years old, 147 years old rather, and he is finally about to die. So after this, Joseph was told, behold, your father is ill. So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. I want you to see Joseph knows that his sons are going to receive a blessing. In essence, this is God giving Joseph a double portion of the blessings. Remember, there are 12 sons of Jacob, and they are the eponymous heads of the 12 tribes of Israel, with a couple of exceptions. So Levi, there is a tribe of Levi, but they don't get the land. So in a sense, you have 13 tribes of Israel if you count the tribe of Levi, because there's no tribe of Joseph. Instead, Joseph gets a double portion. He gets Ephraim and Manasseh, his two sons, and when the 12 tribes go into the land of Israel, they're going to each get a portion of land from the very north part of Israel, which the tribe of Dan will be up there, all the way down into the southern part of Israel, and Judah will be down there. So there are 12 tribes that get land. Levi does not get land. Levi is the tribe of the priest, and they get God. They get a relationship with God that the others don't have. So Joseph, his faith looking to the future. This is what the people of God know, is that we're part of something bigger than ourselves, something that extends far beyond our lives. And Joseph wants his sons to get a blessing that will far outlive him. So he takes Ephraim and Manasseh with him, and it was told Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Then Israel, or Jacob, summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz," that's Bethel, "in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. And said to me," so look what God did. God appeared, God blessed, God spoke. "Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you. I will make of you a company of people, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession." So God promises something to Jacob that won't be realized during his lifetime. I'm going to give this land to your offspring. Again, the book of Hebrews is very honest about that. So these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them afar off. And so Jacob knows that. God gave him the land, but he never got it, most of it. There's one little part he gets, and we'll see that. But God says, "I'm going to give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. And now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are." Now, what's happening here is that Jacob is in effect adopting his grandsons so that they inherit with his sons. He's going to bless them. They're going to be now treated as his sons. And so indeed they become like the 12 tribes. He says, they're going to be as much mine as Reuben and Simeon are. Remember, Reuben and Simeon are his two oldest sons. Reuben, the son of Leah. And he said, these are going to be as much mine as your brothers, Reuben and Simeon are. And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. So he said, any children that you had or have after them, and the Bible doesn't tell us about that. So this may just have been pretty standard adoption formula, where they just pronounce, "These are mine. Any more that you have after that will be counted yours." But we don't know if Joseph actually had any others after that. But as far as we know, these are the only two sons he had. But this is a pronouncement. They're mine. Anything else that you have are yours. And they shall be called by the name of their brothers and their inheritance. In other words, they're brothers with my sons, and they're going to share in the inheritance. As for me, when I came from Padan to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way. Once again, you see Jacob has been living with this sorrow now for years, really all of Joseph's life, or Benjamin's life rather, because Rachel died in childbirth, and now he has once again, he's expressing this incredible sorrow that he had when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. So Rachel's tomb, there's a place in Bethlehem to this day that is recognized as Rachel's tomb. Whether it actually is or not, who knows? But we know that it's there somewhere in Bethlehem. And it's a very sacred spot to both Muslims and Jews. And so he recognizes that I have something in the promised land. My wife Rachel, whom I loved, is buried there. So by bringing this back up, he's making a connection between what's happening here with his death in Egypt, but his longing for the land that God gave him back in Canaan. And this is like an anchor back there. And remember, he's looking to the future. He wants his bones to be taken back to the land of Canaan. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" Again, we think this is part of the adoption process where he's saying, "Come forward and state your name." Who are these? Joseph said to his father, "They're my sons whom God has given me here." He said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face. And behold, God has also let me see your offspring." Man, God has been so good. I didn't ever think I'd see you alive again, and now here I am blessing your children. Then Joseph removed them from his knees. So they're not little boys, but again, this is part of the formula, part of the ceremony, if you will, where they sit on his knees as a picture that they are his offspring. Joseph removes them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right, and brought them near. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. So notice that he's putting his right hand on the younger to give him the primary blessing. He's putting his left hand on the older, Manasseh. And you see this throughout the book of Genesis. Genesis is really a record of this happening. You've got Jacob and Esau, and you've got the twin sons of Tamar. You have Rachel and Leah. In all these examples, you have a flipping, if you will, of the inheritance and the birth. And in this case now, the blessing in the same way of Esau and Jacob. So you see this recurrent theme in Genesis that it is, what is God doing? He's reversing. And in our Luke study, haven't we seen that? Beginning with the prophecy about the birth of Jesus and Mary's Magnificat, you see the reversal that the first are made last, the last are made first. The poor are exalted. Every valley shall be exalted. Every hill shall be brought low. And you see God reversing the order of the world. And Genesis begins to lay that theme in the scripture. So here's Jacob crossing his hands to give the primary blessing to Ephraim, the younger, and the second blessing to Manasseh, the oldest. And he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the messenger who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys, and in them let my name be carried on, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." Now look what Jacob is doing. Two things here. First of all, he's connecting what's happening here to God's promise to Abraham and Isaac, his father and grandfather. God promised to bless them, and through them all the especially through Abraham, would all the earth be blessed. And Isaac, of course, his son, and now Jacob, his son. Remember, Jesus calls God the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob. And Jesus uses that fact to answer the Sadducees, the liberals who deny the resurrection. He says, God is the God of the living, not the dead. And so we know that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob yet live. And here on his deathbed, Jacob, standing in that stream of the covenant, of the grace of God given to humanity through this family. And he's connecting Ephraim and Manasseh with them. The second thing he's doing, he's going all the way back before Abraham. Remember, Abraham shows up in Genesis chapter 12 and becomes his story after that. But prior to that, going all the way back to creation, what's God's first command to Adam and Eve? It's to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And so what you've got here is the writer, Moses, giving us a picture of God's new creation. You sort of have that same thing, remember, after the earth is destroyed at the flood, and you've got, in essence, Noah and his family become the new first family, if you will, from whom everyone descends. In the same way here now, in the covenant people of God, he's invoking this language, the same kind of command God gave at the beginning, to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. He's saying, let now the covenant people fill the earth. Joseph, seeing this hands crossing and blessing on his sons, objects. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. So he reaches out, grabs his father's hands, and tries to move them back. And Joseph said to his father, "Not this way, my father. Since this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother, Ephraim, shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." So what you're seeing here is, in essence, this is a prophecy about the future prominence of the tribes of Israel. And indeed, Ephraim becomes a very prominent tribe, whereas you don't hear much about Manasseh. And some of these tribes we're going to see in the blessings on the sons, they really disappear fairly early. There's no more mention of them in the scriptures. But certainly Ephraim becomes a prominent tribe. So he blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." So he says that this is going to be a proverb among the covenant people now. May you be blessed in the same way Ephraim and Manasseh were blessed. So Jacob sees that what he's doing here has future significance. It's going to be historic among the people of God. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers." Now look, here he's prophesying, he's saying to Joseph, God's going to take you back to the land of Canaan. Now we're going to see that Joseph dies in Egypt, but Joseph dies with a provision that whenever Israel leaves Egypt, and he's predicting the Exodus, that they take his body back to the land of Canaan. And so here you've got these two generations in Egypt. Both of their deaths will be in Egypt. Their burials ultimately will be back in the land of Canaan. "Moreover, I have given to you, rather than to your brothers, one mountain slope that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow." To be honest, there's a lot of dispute about exactly what this means. Most people think that it's talking about the region of Shechem, but there's no record of Jacob taking that with his bow. But remember, that's where his sons wiped out Shechem because of the rape of their sister. but we're not really sure what he's saying here about this mountain slope. This is one of these things when we get to heaven, we'll find out a little bit more about. Now Jacob is going to bless all of his sons. We'll go through this part rather quickly because, again, there's 12 tribes, and we're just going to try and make some time here. But again, some of these blessings are fairly obscure. It's hard for us to know exactly what it means or how it was fulfilled. This is God promising some things to the individual tribes. So Jacob called his sons and he said, "Gather yourselves together that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come." So here he is, the patriarch, and also speaking somewhat prophetically. He's never called a prophet, but he's definitely speaking forward into the future time. He says, "Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel your father." And so he goes into, this is all poetic form. If you're using an ESV, you'll see that this is arranged on the page like poetry. And that's because in Hebrew it is poetic. And he begins to call out each one of them. Now here's the fascinating thing. The first three sons that he mentions, beginning with Reuben, his firstborn, it really sounds in some ways more like a curse than a blessing. But again, he's speaking to the future. "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power." So he says, Reuben, you're my firstborn. You're the first seed of my virile youth. In Hebrew, it's a little plainer in a sense than it is in English here, where he's speaking about the virility of his youth. "Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence." So he said, because you're the firstborn, you ought to have the preeminence of dignity and power. But you won't have it because you went up to your father's bed. You defiled it. You went up to my couch. Remember, he had sex with one of his father's concubines, and this was as disrespectful as it could be. So he says to Reuben, you're not going to have the preeminence. And indeed, you don't hear much about the tribe of Reuben, certainly in the New Testament. Paul's from the tribe of Benjamin, and Jesus, of course, is from the tribe of Judah. You've got a few others tribes mentioned, but there's nothing much about Reuben because he defiled his father's marital bed. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Remember, Simeon and Levi are the ones that took the lead in wiping out the town of Shechem. "Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen." That verse it's hard to really translate in from Hebrew. I think it means they built a wall. They took oxen from Shechem, but this word in Hebrew, it can mean something like building ramparts, and I think it's a reference to their war making. "Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." So here's a prophecy that Levi is not even going to get property, and indeed he does not. There's no mention that Levi is going to be the tribe of the priest, and Simeon is cursed as well. So first three sons that he blesses, in a sense he curses. They're going to have the blessing of being his sons, but they're not going to have the preeminence and the power among their brothers. Now here comes Judah. Judah means praise. Verse 8, "Judah, your brothers shall praise you." Catch the word play? "Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you." Okay, here we have a messianic reference, because the Messiah is going to come from the tribe of Judah. David, the king, Solomon, his son, they're going to be of the tribe of Judah. So it's going to be the kingly tribe, the royal tribe, and the tribe with power. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you've gone up. Now look at the picture here of the warrior Judah. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff. Really, it's like a mace, a weapon, from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Now look at verse 11. Binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. Strange image, isn't it? Now you say, well, what does that mean? Well, let me ask you this. If you had a vineyard and you had a donkey, would you ever tie your donkey up to the vines? You would not. Why? That donkey will eat those grapes and maybe the vines. The point here is that Judah is going to be so blessed and so plentiful that he can tie his donkey up to the vineyard, to the vines, and even the donkey's foal up to the vines. Let them eat. We have plenty. We're not going to run out. And look at the imagery. He has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. Now, one meaning of this is that he has so much wine. Again, this is a picture of fruitfulness, blessing, harvest. He's got so much of it, he can wash his garments in it. It's like water to him. It's so plentiful. But you and I also know there's definitely another reference here. In the Passover, there's a drinking of the wine, and Jesus takes that cup in the New Testament, and he said, "This is my blood of the new covenant, shed for the remission of sins." So what is it that Jesus is doing? He's washing garments in his blood, in the wine of his blood, his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. He's here, just a picture of Judah is going to have plenty. He is going to be, there's a beauty to him, and he's not talking about necessarily a physical beauty, but we know that Jesus has no physical comeliness, but the beauty of him in his purity and in his saving power. So here's the prophecy about Judah. He gets more ink really than the others, and of course he's referred to as the warrior, the royal tribe, the one who has plenty, and the one who washes garments in the blood of grapes. What a beautiful picture of Jesus. Verse 13, Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. Zebulun is up in the northwest corner of Israel, right below. So when Jesus goes up there, and for instance, he goes up and he talks to the Syrophoenician woman, that would have been just north of Zebulun. If you have a map in the back of your Bible that shows the division of the 12 tribes, you might want to look at it. And these descriptions will show you how some of this is fulfilled in where they go. And certainly the fact that Jacob in Egypt, as he's dying, knows where the tribe of Zebulun will settle is remarkable. Only the Holy Spirit can account for that. Verse 14, Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, that the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. So Issachar is going to be like the working tribe, the blue-collar tribe. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan is going to be in the very north part of Israel. In fact, the Jordan River, right? The Yarden, the springs of Dan, the stream of Dan, waters of Dan. Dan is going to be in the north. And because Dan is going to be sort of the buffer of enemies that come from the north. So when the Assyrians attack, or anybody from the north, when they come down from Damascus to attack, Dan is going to be the first line of defense. And so he's like the judge of his people. In the book of Judges, judges deliver. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that the rider falls backwards. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. So here's a pronouncement that Dan is going to be the defender that will repel the attacks. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. So here he ends the blessing on 10 of his sons. Gad, Asher, Naphtali get very little ink here. But now he turns to Joseph. He's already blessed Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. But now he talks specifically about Joseph. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. So it's like a bough of a tree that's planted right by a spring. And remember in Psalm 1, the man that meditates on the law of the Lord is like a tree planted by waters. It's the same image here. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely, yet his bow remained unmoved. Now, who were the archers that attacked Joseph in the past? It was his own brothers. And yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. And here's a reference that the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, the shepherd, the stone of Israel, is going to protect Joseph through Ephraim and Manasseh, presumably. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breast and the womb. There's all kinds here of fertility imagery, isn't it? That Joseph is going to be fruitful in the way that God has preserved him because of his faithfulness. God's going to use him, and he's going to produce a lot. From heaven above, the deep beneath, the breast and the womb. You have this matronly imagery. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents. Up to the bounties of the everlasting hills may they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. So he pronounces this blessing on Joseph. And of course, Joseph is going to rule there in Egypt until his death. Now, he spent a lot of time on Joseph. And of course, if you count up the time of Joseph and Ephraim and Manasseh, Jacob really has favored his favorite son. Now Benjamin, the son of his right hand, that's what Benjamin means. Benjamin, the son of my right hand. And he's his youngest. And of course, Rachel dies, giving him birth. So here's his final blessing. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. Throughout the book of Judges, you see Benjamin as a warrior tribe. The men of Benjamin come to battle. And, of course, we know the Apostle Paul is of the tribe of Benjamin. And he's a theological warrior. I don't think this is direct reference to Paul, but hey, Paul fits. Then verse 28, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with the blessing suitable to him. Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. Now here's why this is significant. You might think, well, why does it matter? Well, remember, Abraham, when Sarah died, he bought that that cave, and he buried Sarah there in the cave of Machpelah, and it became his burying place. It's the only part of the promised land that Abraham's family actually owned and possessed before before they come back in the Exodus. And so it's like the anchor in the land. It's God's down payment on what they're going to get. Abraham is there, Sarah is there, and Isaac is there. So he says, I want you to take me back there and bury me there. They buried Abraham and Sarah his wife, Isaac and Rebekah his wife. There I buried Leah. The field and the cave that in it were bought from the Hittites. Now this is significant. You would expect he would say, take me back and bury me in Bethlehem with Rachel. He does not. I mean, this guy's been talking about Rachel ever since she died. He talks about her when he blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. But now when it comes time for him to be buried, he has a greater draw to the covenant than he does to the woman that he loves. He said, I want to be buried in the land that Abraham, Isaac, and I own, in the land of Canaan. And it's a really significant thing because he does not go just with his feelings here. He goes with the covenant. And verse 33, when Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. So here you have the death of him. Now, what's Joseph's reaction to the death of his father? Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. You see Joseph do those three things several times. He does it, remember when he does it with Benjamin. He does it with his father. He does it with his brothers. Here he does it. You've got Jacob, this guy who can be really tough and austere. And he's very unemotional when he tells Pharaoh exactly what he needs to do and puts himself in position to be the prime minister. He can be very tough with the Egyptian people, make them pay 20% and really enslave them all, give them their freedom back as long as they pay 20% taxes. He's a tough guy, but man, he's very, very emotional when it's a matter of his heart and his family. And you see these three actions over and over. He falls on their face, he weeps, and he kisses them. He did that here with his father as he dies. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for it, for that's how many are required for embalming. So it takes the Egyptians, whatever process they had, and we got to admit, man, they were good at it. We still have mummies, you may not know this, at Southern Seminary in Louisville. We actually have a mummy, an Egyptian mummy. And you can't really see the body. We got the sarcophagus, but there's a body in there. You could not get it these days. Over 100 years ago, somehow we got it, and it's in our library. But there's a mummified body in there. And so it is that the Egyptians, when they embalmed, when they mummified, it preserved bodies for a long time. So it takes them 40 days to do that. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. So we know that this was customary for the Egyptians to mourn for royalty for 70 to 72 days. And he's royalty in essence because he's Joseph's father. When the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh. And I'm going to skip over this and just say that he asked Pharaoh very humbly for permission to go back up to Canaan with his brothers and take his father and to bury him there. And, this was probably a little threatening to Pharaoh because he doesn't want to lose Joseph. And with the whole clan leaving, it could be that they never come back. But he's learned to trust Joseph, and he grants that. And by the way, it describes the route that they take. If you look at a map, the natural way for them to go to Hebron would be to go right up the coast of the Mediterranean, cross the Negev, and go straight to Hebron. But it describes them going to the east side of the Jordan, modern day Jordan, the country of Jordan, and then crossing the Jordan River, coming back to Hebron. Why do they do that? Again, it's prophetic of the path that they're going to take in the book of Exodus. Israel is going to go that way, the way Israel, the person, is now taken. Israel, the nation, will go in that same path, and it describes it here. So look at verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." Well, here's something, a revelation really of their character. They think now that dad's dead, now Joseph is going to make us pay for what we did to him. It shows their insecurity. It also shows something of, I think, the way they think. Joseph has not done anything that would make them believe he would now go back on his word to them and to his father and be cruel to them or make them pay, get vengeance on them. But it says a lot about the way they think, that they suspect he'll do exactly that. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you." Now, we don't know if Jacob ever really said this to them or not, but they're playing every card they've got. That's not the only one they play. They play the father card. Look what else they play. "Now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." Isn't that interesting? They don't say your brothers. They don't say your father's sons. They say the servants of the God of your father. So they play the father card, but they play the God card too. Now, we're just servants of God. If you hurt us, you're hurting him. And they invoke the name of God here. And so, look, what does Joseph do? Well, good old emotional Joseph. I like this guy. Like me, he cries at McDonald's commercials. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. He couldn't believe it. What? My brothers think that's who I am after all this that I've done? And it causes him to weep. His brothers also came before him and fell down and said, "Behold, we are your servants." Now look, how does the Joseph narrative start in chapter 37? With Joseph's dream that his brothers will what? Bow down. Now, look at this scene, the very end of the book. What are they doing? They're bowing down. They come and they bow down before him and they say, "Behold, we are your servants. We're your slaves." The guys who sold Joseph into slavery are now willing to put themselves as slaves to him. But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God?" Wow. Joseph gets this, like, man, it's not up to me. I can't make you slaves. I'm not God. And God has made us brothers, and I'm going to treat you like a brother. I'm not in the place of God. He says, verse 20, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Look at that. Joseph is willing to see his story as part of a much bigger story, and he sees his pain and suffering that they caused as something that God did in order to save many people alive. Wow. Man, we need to hear that today. I mean, we're going through some stuff right now. There are a lot of people out there that are willing to see their own suffering as worthwhile to save others. Thank God for those in the medical profession and those on the front lines of the battle against the coronavirus, and in so many other ways. There are people constantly putting themselves in harm's way because they see that it's worthwhile. Their potential suffering and pain and sorrow is worth it to help others, and Joseph has that spirit. he says, God meant this for good, that many should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Now, look at the end of the book of Genesis, verse 22. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. So Joseph adopts his grandchildren the same way that Jacob adopted his sons. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you. God's going to come to be your help. And you shall carry up my bones from here. Now look, right at this point, they are free. They're in the land of Egypt. They have plenty. They're in the land of Goshen. They're a part of Egypt. They're herdsmen, and they've got flocks, and they're not under any oppression. And yet, Joseph knows what's coming. You're going to have trouble. God will have to visit you. He'll have to come and be your help. And when you leave this place, promise me you'll carry my bones. So Joseph does not instruct, as his father did, take me now. They already took Jacob up there and buried him in the cave of Machpelah. But Joseph says, no, wait until the Exodus, the way out. Wait until God visits you and leads you up out of this land. Carry my bones from here. So here's what we saw in Hebrews chapter 11. This is Joseph with his future faith. He's trusting that God's going to do a work. Israel's going to go through some tough stuff in Egypt. They're going to be in bondage, and they're going to be mistreated. But the day's coming when God's going to lead them up. Now look at this. So Joseph died being 110 years old. They embalmed him and put him in a coffin in Egypt. A couple of things. I can't help but notice here that the book that begins with God speaking the universe into existence ends in a little box in Egypt. You see how the big story has come down and focused on this one story. And what ended with life, what began with life, ends with death. And yet, this death is anticipating something. It's anticipating life. God's going to visit you, and you're going to be taken out of here. And when you go, take me with you. And this image of Joseph dying in Egypt, being embalmed and placed in a coffin, probably what we would call a sarcophagus, it ends with this sense of longing, of waiting. Remember, we've talked about the story of redemption and how most of the Old Testament is that sense of longing. Joseph dies, yet expecting something more. There's going to be an exodus. There's going to be a redemption. There's going to be a way out. And he's going to be taken to the land of his fathers and buried there. But who's going to do it? It's not going to be Joseph. It's going to be somebody whose life begins with him put in a little basket and launched out in the river. Moses, the deliverer. And so this is how the book of Genesis ends. The story has gotten very small. There's a sense of waiting, of anticipation, and longing for it. And you know what? That's where we're going to pick up next week. We're going to go right into the book of Exodus, and especially in these early chapters, we're going to see now how God works and how he sets up the story of redemption in fulfillment of everything that Joseph said. I hope you enjoyed our study of the book of Genesis as I have. It is foundational to the rest of the Bible. You have to understand Genesis to understand the rest of it. So thanks for taking this journey with me. And next week, I hope to see you in Exodus chapter 1. God bless.